All right, so what did people think of the palindromes problem last week? Y'all are being suspiciously quiet this morning.
It was a lot simpler once I learned to implement some regex.
It was a long time ago.
You said once you learned to implement regex, it got a lot easier?
Yeah, because I was trying to go about it a different way, and then because I've always been kind of afraid of using regex, and then I did a little research on it, and then just came together.
Mm-hmm. All right. So would you all rather see me go over this in Python or JavaScript?
Python?
Sure. All right, I'm going to check out a new branch. All right, so let's take a look at the README. So a palindrome is a word, phrase, number, or other sequence of characters which reads the same backwards or forwards, such as madam or kayak. So we're going to create a program that detects if a word is a palindrome. Your method should take in a word as a parameter and determine if the word is a palindrome. In both scenarios, true or false, it should respond accordingly. We should be able to handle both integers and strings. And we're going to be using our red-green refactor method here. So start this exercise by running the test spec, palindromespec.py, or dot, well, that says RB. That's from an earlier version of this. And then the challenge version is being able to do it when it has palindromic sentences, such as "sore was I, ere I saw Eros," or "a man, a plan, a canal, Panama." All right. So we've got some very basic driver code here. Palindrome spec. So right now we can't even run this because we need to have this do something. So I'm just going to write pass so that we can at least get that driver code all failing. All right, so how about before we do anything else, we translate this into some better actual unit testing. So I'm going to import unit test. All right, now someone remind me, how do you implement unit test? What's that first step?
Import dot require
So we've imported unit test up here, but now that we have it, we need to create something in order to do that, right?
You have to create a class.
Yep. So we call it class, test palindrome, and that inherits, and we'll talk about what that means. Unit test dot test case, and then we can make some methods. So we could say def test,
Single word.
Yeah, single word. That's a good one. Then we could say self dot. So I like that I have this thing that lets me see all of the methods, because we know that, okay, this is supposed to return either true or false, right? So if I do assert true, I can guess that probably means that whatever I'm doing should be true, right? So I should say palindrome race car. Of course, it's never a good idea to assume, so I'm going to go to the unit test docs and make sure that assert true works the way I think it does. So I do assert true. There we go. Test the expression is true, or assert false is false. So you just give it an expression, and that's it. Okay, seems pretty straightforward. So we can just add a couple more of these. So I could call this one test, multiple cases, because the one has a mix of capital letters and lowercase letters. So assert true for palindrome noon. And let's do civic as well. Because it's pretty much the same test. All right, and then we could say def test not palindrome. So it should be able to detect something that's not a palindrome. So we could say assert false palindrome. And the examples we have are nice and bomb. And then we can also say def test integer. Self.assert true palindrome. We can do 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. And let's do one that's false, like 1, 2, 3. Assert false palindrome 1, 2, 3. So I'm just going to do these ones for now. We'll do let's add the ones for sentences as well while we're here. So def test palindrome sentence. Self.assert true palindrome. Soar was I, air, I saw Eros. And def test, well, then we can just use a different sentence in the same test suite. Self.assert true palindrome, and that's what? A man, a plan, a canal, Panama. All right. What questions do you have about setting up our unit tests?
I actually have one, Noah.
Yeah.
With the self.assert true or false, is that better practice to use rather than assert equal if we know our output is going to be a bool?
I wouldn't say it's better or worse necessarily. I think essentially it's kind of the difference between saying dot true versus equal equals true. I like using the method that is specifically designed for each of these. So if we have a method that is explicitly looking for, testing whether something is true or false, I think it's more clear what we're doing and also saves us just a little bit of time since I don't have to write assert equal palindrome nice comma false, even if it's just a small thing. But there's nothing wrong with saying assert equal true or assert equal false.
Okay, thank you.
What other questions do you have? Right, I'm going to run my test suite. All right, nothing happened because I missed the thing I always forget. If name equals main, unit test.main. So now if I run it, I ran 5 tests, got 4 failures. So something passed somehow. I'm curious which one did. My guess it was probably my not palindrome. Yep, because this is an interesting phenomenon that we haven't really talked about very much. Because in coding, there's a concept called truthy and falsy, or truthiness and falsiness. And essentially, your a language will reads certain things as being true, kind of like, or true like, or false like. And so my not palindrome test said, okay, I want to make sure that this function returns something false. And my function returns none. And Python essentially reads none as being falsy. And therefore this test passed because I said, hey, is none false? And it said, sure. So this is this kind of highlights the importance of being very explicit with your code, being very explicit and very broad reaching with your testing, because you can get false positives like this. So that's always fun. Anyway, moving on to our palindrome. So we have tests that we need to pass. And you know what? It said right here, red-green refactor. So I'm going to do something a little bit silly. At another job I had, we would call this the shameless green method. So I'd say, okay, I want to pass that first test. It says, okay, I should assert true palindrome race car. I could just say, return true. And I passed several of my tests that way. But then I get test integers, true is not false, test not palindrome. So essentially, I would just keep on doing whatever I had to in order to pass each test. But in this case, I'm not going to get too into it because it gets a little bit silly. So this would make a lot more sense with a different challenge, so just forget that. Let's get some pseudocode going instead. So yeah, sorry about that. That was not a good example I picked. So pseudocoding. We need to figure out if something is a palindrome. What's our first step? Remember, with pseudocoding, we're putting this in as plain English as possible and breaking it down into as small steps as we can. So it doesn't matter how obvious that step may seem, we still need to take that step.
You got to write a function that takes in a string, an argument that is a string.
Yep. Write a function that takes a string as an argument.
Or, I mean, I guess it sounds like we're taking integers as well, so you might have to change it later to a string, but in any case, one argument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, write a function that takes a string or an integer as an argument, and you just mentioned that we may have to change it from an integer to a string. So we can do that right away, can't we? Because we'll need to do that before we do anything else if it's an integer. So if argument is integer, convert to string. All right. So the cool thing about palindrome is there are so many different ways to do it. So I am willing to take any particular method in this case.
I think you also have to remove spaces from the string and special characters, right?
Yeah, so we know that for our palindrome sentences, we're going to have to get rid of spaces and punctuation marks because we only want to look at the letters, and we need to make sure this thing is not case sensitive because something like noon should still pass. So we could say, all right, remove spaces and punctuation marks. And convert to all, we could do all uppercase or all lowercase. It's honestly not, which one we pick doesn't make a difference. I'm going to say lowercase. So all of that prepares our string because we know, all right, we're getting rid of everything that's not a letter or a number, and we're getting rid of all cases, so that everything is just lowercase letters and numbers, and that's it. Once that's done, we still need to figure out if it's the same reversed, right? How do we do that?
You create a new variable.
Create a new variable. What is that new variable?
It would be our fixed, like our lowercase and punctuation removed, reversed by just using the reversed function in Python.
Okay, so we're creating a new variable and storing this string that we've created as, like, storing the reversed version of that string?
Right.
That is reversed string. All right, and once we've gotten that, what's the next step?
Compare if the reverse string is the same as the original, or original string without the whatchamacallits, the extra punctuations and things like that. Like for the sentence, the canal and everything, just kind of comparing that without those items, maybe.
Yeah, and we've already made sure we said we're going to remove all the spaces and the punctuation marks and then reverse it. So hopefully, we do this right, that won't be in it. We won't have to worry about those. So if the string equals reverse string, we return true. Else we return false. All right. How does the pseudocode look? I heard somebody kind of say something, but really couldn't tell what it meant.
Should the create a new variable that is a reverse string be broken down a little more?
Yeah, we can do that. How would you break it down?
Make it an empty array, and then after that, create a loop that iterates through the array backwards.
Oh, so you would say that means we would have to convert the original string to an array as well?
It depends. You could just take the reversed one and convert that back into a string, and then compare the two strings together. Or you can make them both arrays and then compare the two arrays.
Yep. So I see what you're going for. So we could convert to an array and then compare two arrays, or compare two strings. I think with the method that we've kind of made so far, we don't need to convert it to an array. Not that that's not a good idea. It's just I think that's not the path we've already kind of started on. But we can definitely break this down as like create a new variable called reversed string. And they say set reversed string to argument to reversed argument is what we called it earlier. Like so. All right. So now we need to convert this into actual code. So first we have say, if argument is an integer, we'll convert to string. All right, so in Python, how do we check whether something is an integer or is a string?
You could say is type or is word wrapped in type.
So if type word, like so?
Yep. And then logically equivalent to int. Yeah, you could do it like that. No, just int. Oh yeah, there you go. Yep, just like that. Yep.
Yep, so the type keyword there lets us figure out what type of data a variable is. So we can say if it's an integer, we could say word equals str word. That should convert it from a integer into a string. All right, then we need to remove all spaces and punctuation marks, which is a very simple thing to say, but we actually need to figure out how to do that, right? The question is, all right, is there a method that'll do that for us? I could look it up as well. I could say Python remove special characters. Let's try that. I need to remove all special characters, punctuation, and spaces from a string so that I only have letters and numbers. Well, that's helpful. So this says this can be done without regex. So it says string equals special characters, and then they have something here called join e for e in string if e dot is al num. So that uses the string dot is al num method, which I've never heard of. Let's see, I'm going to follow this link that this person left so I can see this one. Returns true if a character in the strings are alphanumeric and there's at least one character false or otherwise. A character C is alphanumeric is one of the following returns true. Okay, well that seems useful. So they did using the dot join method. So let's take a look at the dot join method as well so we know what exactly he's saying here. So it joins all items in a tuple into a string using a hash character as a separator. So the example they have here is they have a tuple using John, Peter, and Vicky, and then they say hash.join my tuple. Or that's the example. It doesn't have to be a tuple, I think. And so it says it combined John, Peter, and Vicky into John hash Peter hash Vicky. And here's the definition that says join takes all items in an iterable and joins them into one string. So the example he used then says, all right, an empty string character dot join, and then added this other argument that says e for e in string if e dot is al num. So that's an interesting way of doing it because it looks like what he's saying, e for e in string if e dot is al num. So let's see what exactly that e for e in string if e dot is al num does, because that's interesting and I want to try it out. So I'm going to copy this example he used and say str equals that. And then I'm going to say, if I just do e for e in str, I shouldn't call it str, I just realized, because str is a keyword. So I'm going to exit out of this and start again. Let's call this example equals that. Then I'll say e for e for, so I'm not sure why it says e for e in string, e in example if e dot is al num. Do I have that right? All right, I don't think I can, maybe I can't do that on its own. So maybe I'd have to do it like so. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure. I've never seen this particular syntax saying e for e in that.
I think you'd have to wrap it in brackets for because that's a list comprehension. So if you set a variable equal to that in brackets, it should make a list.
So list one equals, and when you say brackets, do you mean these or these?
Yeah, square brackets.
Oops. Let's try that then. Okay, so it looks like this method does give us it turns this string into a list of all of the non-alphanumeric characters, and all of the alphanumeric characters. And then when we call the .join method on this list, it does what the person said it would. So again, I'm not super familiar with the syntax he's using, but we can see right here what it does is it kind of loops over the initial string example and converts it into a list by saying, you know, okay, we have a variable called e in our example, and we're keeping it if it's an alphanumeric character. Are people following the logic of this? Because I don't want to use a method if I'm not understanding it.
That seems like more plain English than regex.
Yep, because yeah, an alternative solution would be regex. And we're covering regex later, so let's stick with the non-regex solution for now. I'm going to clear this out. And so we could say, all right, empty string dot join. And we want to say, okay, let's call this one, we should save this to a variable. I'm not sure what we should call it. Maybe only alnum, alphanumeric. We can say e for e in word, if e dot is alnum.
You know, I posted what might be a helpful image in the Slack. It's basically shows you what part of that is the expression, what part's the sequence, and then what part's, you know, the conditional.
Ah, yeah, that is helpful. So our output expression, in this case, is e. Then we have a variable called e. So we're interesting that we're defining the variable after we set the output expression, which I've never seen before. But hey, if it works, it works. Our input sequence. And then we have our optional predicate saying, all right, if it's this. All right. What questions do people have about this method before we move on? Okay. All right, so we have successfully removed all spaces and punctuation marks. We need to convert it to all lowercase. So we could say only alnum equals only alnum dot lower.
Yeah, it's lower for Python, 2 lowercase for JavaScript.
Mm-hmm. All right. Then we need to create a new variable called reverse string. And then it says we want to set reverse string to the reversed only alnum.
Noah?
Yes.
It looks like you're still in your if this thing is an int.
Oh, yeah.
Do you need to outdent at some point?
Yes, I do. Thank you for catching that. Yep. You got to be careful with Python. If you are tired and haven't finished your coffee for the day, that can happen. All right, and now we need to set reversed string to the reverse of only alnum. And does anyone remember how we can find the reverse of a string? Because I believe we covered it last week. At least once.
I think the way that we went over it, one of the methods at least, was the brackets, the semicolon, -1.
Yep. So we have only alnum ::, -1, which is essentially using the slice method to say, give me everything from -1, meaning the last character, all the way to the end, or the beginning in this case, I should say. And then we can check if they equal one another. So if only alnum equals reverse string, return true. If not, we return false. All right, what questions do people have about the solution before we see if it works?
Did you have to declare a reverse string as an empty array, or could you just have declared it the first time as only alnum reversed?
Yeah, I could have also done it this way. I was just following my pseudocode in this particular case. All right, I'm going to run my test suite. All right, we passed all 5 tests. All right, what questions do people have about Palindrome?
I actually have one quick one.
Yeah.
So when we do the reverse string like that, are we not sure about what's going on behind the scenes? Like, is that looping through and rebuilding the word reverse? Like, is that doing a loop iteration or no?
That's a good question. We'd have to look into how the slice method actually works behind the scenes, because my instinct says, okay, I think the way that slice works, if I was planning it, would be you don't need a loop for that, but it could very well be looping. I'm gonna check this out. If I say Google Python does slicing a string use a loop, let's see if anyone has any answers. Understanding Python slices. That sounds like it might be useful. So, example of the slice method gets you everything from character 3 up to character 8. So it says, while for loops in Python don't explicitly use numeric indices, slices do. But does it use a loop behind the scenes? All right, this doesn't say. So this is something I would have to look into in more detail because I am honestly not sure. But very good question.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'll definitely research some of that as well.
Yeah. One thing I want to show you all as well is a different way of writing out some of this. Is I could also say return only alnum equals reverse string, like so. Because when I create this logical operator here, I am essentially saying, hey, is this thing true or false? It's essentially an expression that will return a Boolean. So all I'm doing when I do this is saying return the result of this comparison, true or false. And doing so gives me the same result as saying if this equals this, return true, else return false.
I assume that works with greater than, less than.
Yep.
And what about the and or operators?
Yeah, all logical expressions and comparators, including using and or, you can return in this method.
Cool, thanks.
So I could say if this, and 1 equals 1, that would still work because both of these are true. So generally speaking, if your method comes down to just a simple comparator at the end and you need to return the result of that, you can just return the comparator itself. All right. Any other questions before we take a break?
I have a question, Noah. Is it better practice to look up a method to do something, or if you know you can just write the logic yourself pretty easily? Is it, I mean, they probably take about this amount of time since you're looking it up, and versus just writing like a few lines of code. I was just wondering which one is better.
Good question. So in general, what I would say while you're going through Code Platoon, maybe not in the future, is if you can see a logical way of doing something without a built-in method, try that first. And then if you like pound your head against the wall on this for 20 minutes or 30 minutes without getting anywhere, look for a built-in method. Or if you do it successfully and everything works, then check for the built-in method and see if there's a way to refactor it. So in general, yeah, I think it's always a good idea to try things without a built-in method if you can. But if you use a built-in method, that's also fine. And it's always a good idea to go over your solution again after you finished it and see, okay, was there a simpler way for me to do that? All right, any other questions? Okay, in that case, let's take a 7-minute break, be back here at 9:20, and we're gonna go over balanced parentheses.